on. That's a new addition that they've that voice thing. All right.
We got it with our Zoom meeting with our Pilates class too.
I guess it's a privacy thing that they feel like they need to
They
do.
want to make sure everybody knows, which is a good, I mean, people should, that's good. All right, so this week's Torah portion is Shelach, which is also the name mitzvah portion of both my father and one of my favorite students from Brooklyn. So has a special place in my heart. It's the first like half of it is just the list of names. It's a great portion in general and for a b'nai mitzvah because of the it's about confidence and how do you see yourself and the whole thing with the spies, but also as far as reading it, especially in a Reform context where you really only read the first 16 verses or so, it's just names. They're fairly short verses, like in the Hebrew, they're fairly short verses, and then it's lamate, like from the tribe of, and then names. So it was it's not the hardest aliyah to learn to read in Hebrew. Which isn't to say that it's exactly easy if you are 13 and not fluent in Hebrew and are learning trope for the first time and whatever, but anyway, so that's the first part. It's just the names. Here's the heads. Here's who was selected from each tribe to be part of the scouts. They are sent into the land of Canaan. I couldn't decide if I wanted to say Canaan or Canaan, and then it came out weird. Okay. And to sort of suss out how they're going to go about, there's sort of this like implicit, the way it's framed is like, or the way that 10 of the scouts come back and report, it's almost like they're judging if they can or should enter the land, but like that's not actually the option. God is going to bring them into this land one way or the other. They're really going to suss out like what the opposition might be, how they like what the best route is, things like that. Like there really wasn't meant to be a choice as to whether or not the Israelites do settle Canaan, but it's sort of framed in that way, and especially because then 10 of the scouts come back and say, there's no way, we're not doing it, forget it, because they see the people as so big and it's scary and there's no way we can conquer them and but of course Caleb and Joshua say no, like we can handle it. Yes, the people are big, but we have God on our side. And they describe the beautiful land, like the land itself and how lush it is, and it's flowing with milk and honey. Milk and honey, and the grapes are as big as people, and very like effusive language. They also use some not Caleb and Joshua, but the others use some hyperbolic language that I find very interesting, and I don't know a lot about what the traditional conclusions are about this, but certainly rife for midrash. This last line of chapter 13, the Nephilim and the Anakim. Nephilim are like a class of angels. That means the fallen ones, or the angels here on earth. Like the ones that mated with the daughters of man in the Noah Parsha. And Anakim literally means giants. So is that just like, again, is that hyperbolic about how big and strong the Canaanites were and how scared the Israelites were? Or was there like a race of giants roaming the land? I don't know. So when Caleb and Joshua are, disagree with the rest of the people want to stone them. They're so freaked out. And God intervenes. There's another plague. And so there's lots of arguing. But obviously Caleb and Joshua win out that fight, and everybody lives happily ever after. But so eventually they start to plan their entry in. So yeah, there is some good there's some good like one-liners in this parsha. So I don't know, where do people want to focus in or start?
Okay, my first question, and I thought I had asked this last year, but now I'm not sure. But anyway, Hosea to Joshua, why was the name changed? And
There was I follow a Jewish meme page on Facebook, and they had a funny joke of like, Zipporah says, "Oh, I hear Yehoshua, or that Yehoshua guy is a really good guy. You should take him under your wing." And Moses says, "Yehoshua, I've been calling him Hoshea this whole time." Like it's, like he just had the name wrong and he needed his wife to correct him. But I think the they're related words. They sound very similar. They have the same root. The addition, or the Yehoshua, the adding of the Yah, I think is a sign of God's presence. It's a marker of his elevation in spiritual status. Even though the official, like, making him the successor doesn't happen for a while yet, it's a sign that it's coming.
So there's a word for that in literature when you do that.
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing, yeah, it's a foreshadowing.
I thought maybe it was a language mix-up, like Jose is spelled with a J in Spanish, so.
Right. Well, and that comes from, Jose is the Spanish for Joseph, right?
Yeah.
More so, yeah. But certainly that Y is the same as a J. That's how you get Jesus from Yeshua, which is also like just another weird spelling of Yehoshua. So I don't know. Anyway, that's the deal with Hoshea to Yehoshua. Yes, his name in Exodus 13:17, his name is already Yehoshua. Well, where does the name change come? Doesn't that come earlier? Hoshea, son of Nun, is 8. And then 16, he changes it in 17.
No, he said
we're at
Exodus.
numbers. Sorry. Okay. Yes. Yehoshua is one of those characters that really, I think, highlights the point that Joel's always making about that, like, there is no before and after in Torah, because where he crops up and his relationship with Moses, like, doesn't seem to follow a very linear line. in terms of like, here he's seen as Moses's assistant, and then here he's one of the tribes and or one of the scouts, and like he's elevated because of his loyalty or his faith in the scouts, but also he was already Moses's second-hand man over here. And like there's all this, like, he's never fully really explained his relationship to Moses is never really fully explained. And where he crops in and out raises some questions, I think, about like what his deal was and how that all developed. So the name is just, I think, like another piece of that doesn't fully make sense. And then not that this should be incorporated into canon in any way, shape, or form, but there was that movie, something Gods and Kings, Kings and Gods, where Christian Bale and Ben Kingsley played Nun. It was about the Exodus story vaguely, but it also was like cartoonishly action, whatever, like the 300 style. But in that movie, Joshua is born and enslaved in Egypt, which like the whole generation that lived in Egypt dies in the wilderness. So I don't know. That's kind of the only thing I remember about the movie, because all of it was so ridiculous. But that was one thing that I was like,
It does say,
it does
sorry.
say,
it does say that except for Caleb and Joshua, they're all killed except Caleb and Joshua.
okay.
It does say that. Before we get too much further in, could you please translate the name of the portion?
Shelach, it means like the sent ones.
Okay, so send the men to scout the land.
Yeah.
From that, okay.
Like in modern, yeah, Shelach lecha, you will send the men. But the shlichim, like, is as a noun. That's still the term we use, like when Israeli kids come and like have, I don't know if you've encountered this. We don't have one at Ner Shalom, obviously, but there are a few in Northern Virginia where like it'll either be the year right after their army service, or sometimes it's even like alternative service if they don't actually fight in the military, where they come to America and just like have sort of community relations roles in Jewish communities and like teach American kids about Israeli life. And they're called shlichim, like they are the sent ones that, it's sort of like an ambassadorial term.
Okay. We should send for some.
Yeah, I don't know how you get in on that, or like what, I think it costs the community money, but like Olam Tikva in Fairfax shares theirs with Gesher. So things like that, you can split the cost with other communities. I don't know, maybe we could split one with Fredericksburg or Warrenton, or small.
We'll look into that. Okay.
A shaliach is a member of the Hasidic community. Yes, right. A shaliach is also the missionaries.
The Latter-day Saints guys in ties and white shirts.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what that's the translation of that word.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Let's see, who else anybody else had a question or a place they want to start or continue? We already started, but I misspoke before also, by the way. I should say they don't God doesn't actually send the plague that he threatens. This is one of the places where God and Moses have like a they go back and forth on who is the most angry with the Israelites. And every time one of them is mad, the other has to be like, now, they're just children. You have to go easy on them. So that happens here. And then we get the line that then becomes part of our High Holy Day liturgy. The Lord is, or a line that becomes part of our High Holy Day liturgy. The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression.
But then it goes on and it says.
Yes, then it does go on, but God will still punish.
But it's interesting.
It's
When I read that, it was interesting that the two of them were together. I mean, because, I mean, not just, yeah, you know, he's slow to anger, but he does punish, but also punishes up to the third and fourth generation. And that's pretty unforgiving. So it was interesting that the two were together.
Yeah. Well, I think so. This is how it appears, at least in the liturgy. And I haven't necessarily put a lot of thought into it in the biblical context specifically, as opposed to the liturgical context. But I think part of it is like about understanding how sin can be passed on, not in a like you are responsible for the sins of your father directly kind of way, but like if you learn that behavior and you continue to perpetuate or deny, reparations or whatever, then that continues, and then you will also suffer the spiritual consequences. And so there's another verse that's very similar, at least in the English. Yeah, and in the Hebrew, in Exodus, that we also read during High Holy Days, the Lord, El Rahum V'Chanun, that is kind. It's a lot of these same adjectives: slow to anger. The word compassionate is in there somewhere. Rahum, abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity, blah blah blah. And there isn't the second part there. Right? Because like that's part of the High Holy Days, is balancing like that God will be compassionate and forgive us all our sins, but also like that God is a God of judgment and like holds us to a very high standard, and that we have to each generation try better, harder, to continue to progress as a people.
I thought it was interesting after the community threatened to pelt Joshua and Caleb with stones. It says the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting, and it makes a point of saying to all the Israelites. It doesn't appear to everybody. That in fact, there was that part earlier that we read about why it's dangerous for him to appear to everybody, and here he is, and so must have really been mad about this one.
Yeah, well, and I think like right, exactly that point, that it could be dangerous to the people, but like God also just wanted to send a pestilence to the people. So I don't think God is thinking very much about how their feeble human minds will respond to his presence, right? God wants to make a strong statement, disturb them a bit in this sense. Yeah.
So they all heard that message about dying in the wilderness as they had asked. They didn't have to hear it through Moses this time.
Right. Which is like, it's a little ironic because earlier, I'm scrolling back and forth trying to keep track of which part happens where, but earlier they say like, why have you brought us out in this wilderness to die? We should just go back to Egypt. Or why, taking us to a land where we will fall by the sword. We should go back to Egypt. So all right, so dying in the desert is not exactly the same as dying by the sword, but there are other parts where they complain about that we're hungry, we're thirsty, we're going to die in this desert of exposure. We should go back to Egypt. And then God says, you know what? Fine, you are gonna do that. Like, that's it. I'm done trying to provide for your every whim. That's it. So there you go.
And
I have
then,
heeded the incessant muttering of the Israelites against me. That is a good line.
and then the next morning they set out to the hill country to see what it was that they've turned down, I guess. And Moses warns them not to, but they all go, and so they all end up dying by the sword, I guess. And do they mean everybody over 20? Or, I mean, because it says all the Israelites, and that would really cut down on the number of people that came into the promised land. I'm on, I'm sorry, 39 of 14.
39. I don't see where it says they were all
Okay, and then it goes on,
You were
so
prepared.
40 and 44. They
Right.
marched toward the crest of the hill country, and
The Ark of the
I guess it
Covenant.
doesn't say everybody died, but yeah.
Yeah. Dealt them a
Okay.
shattering blow. So I don't think we need to assume that everyone died, just that it was a
Okay.
bloody battle that did
Right.
not end
Shattering.
well for them.
A shattering blow, yes.
Yeah. Yep. I think we talked about this last year too, but it's one of my favorite Torah Haftarah pairings. This the Haftarah for this parsha is then when it's from the book of Joshua. So after they've crossed, no, it's when they are camped right on the outside of Jericho, and they send in two more spies. This time it's not Caleb and Joshua because they're in charge, but they send in two other spies, and they are saved by a woman named Rachav, who is either an innkeeper or a brothel madam, or both. Depends on which translation you read. Yeah, and because of her, they are all they are successful in overtaking Jericho and entering into that's their first entrance into the Holy Land. And she's painted in a positive light in that story, but then we never really see her again. But I believe I was told that in the New Testament, she is mentioned as one of the righteous women of the Old Testament, that like Jesus names her as like, a spiritual mother. I don't know. I'm not a scholar of the New Testament, but I think that I was told that at some point. Which is nice. Women getting recognized.
Speaking of which,
Yes.
in 1537, God tells Moses to speak to the Israelite people and instruct for them to make themselves fringes in the corner of their garments throughout the ages. Now in English, it just comes out as speak to the Israelite people. It doesn't say men. And I know very often people means men, like in the census counts and all that, but it doesn't specifically say that in English. So it's a good excuse to allow women to do that, seems like.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where in the Hebrew is a gendered language, like most languages. So the default when you have plural, when you have a mixed crowd, is still masculine. So it's kind of impossible to tell um, when it means people broadly versus men. But there's also, I mean, so most rituals that women are discouraged from in traditional communities, they're not actually banned from. It's that men are obligated to time-bound mitzvot and women are not obligated. And then there's also things like a woman can't, like a woman shliach tzibor, there's another shliach use of that root, but it means like the leader of the community, the person who's leading prayer. Um, a woman can't pray on behalf of a man, so that's why she doesn't count in a mitzvah. I mean, a minyan. And then in some cases too, that women's voices are too sensual, so that's another reason they're not allowed into the prayer space. But for the most part, anything men, Orthodox men do, Orthodox women are still welcome to do in their, in women's spaces. There's no prohibition against a women's minyan or women singing amongst themselves or whatever. And then all the more so, the fringes have some connection to time-bound mitzvot and how they like are reminders of certain things. And like, you wear the talit gadol, the prayer shawl, mostly for morning prayer and things like that. But the talit katan, the fringes to wear under your shirt, you wear them all the time. It's not a time-bound mitzvah.
Right.
So there's really no reason for a woman not to do it. Um, so it's something that Haviva Ner David, did I get her name right? She talks about, Joel's nodding, so I'm guessing that I said her name right. That she talks about a lot in her book, Life on the Fringes. But it's about her becoming a fairly orthodox female rabbi. Like she's not the way like the rabbah, it was ordained by Avi Weiss or anything like that. Like I think I don't know how she identifies like sectarian, but she's very traditional in her ritual orientation, but she's a woman and she's a rabbi and she wears fringes and, you know, um, the whole deal. So it inspired a bit of a movement. She inspired a bit of a movement of women wearing fringes. And she just published a book about Israeli Palestinian women's circles. So she's a cool lady. I've looked into buying talitot katanot, a few times, but I'm very small and I'm very afraid of asking too many questions to get one that really fits me because, the people that sell them don't approve of women wearing them. So I get anxious and I've never actually pulled the trigger on that.
Can you, I mean, not lie, but make them assume that you're buying it for a young boy? And do boys wear them before they're 13?
Yeah, they can't, absolutely. So I have considered that. Buying it for a 12-year-old boy is roughly my size. But anyway,
It would be warm in the summer.
it would be. But they make different I mean, the fringes themselves have to be specific material, but the vest part can be mesh. It can be,
Oh.
it can be any material. I guess except a combination of wool and linen, but you wouldn't want to wear the wool anyway. So,
I didn't know that was a combination, that, wool and linen. I thought you said wool and women.
yeah.
All right, this is not that important, but if we go back to the list of the tribes and the chiefs, if nobody else
Yeah.
has anything they want to talk about, just the line 11 from the tribe of Joseph, namely the tribe of Manasseh. So what's the genealogy there, or what's the connection there between? That's the only specific breakdown in the whole list. So what's the difference?
That is interesting. Well, okay, so I think part of it is, why do I not see Levi?
Because the
That-
Levites didn't have to.
Yeah, the Levites.
But then there should still be, okay, Gad, Naphtali, Asher, Dan, Joseph. Oh, okay, because Ephraim is separate. That is weird. So because the Levites aren't counted, this is true for the land appropriations as well. And I wasn't sure how this broke down here, but it is the same. So because the Levites don't have a parcel of land and they don't apparently have to send a fighter or a shaliach here. But Joseph is given a double portion, right? Because both of his children, Ephraim and Manasseh, have separate territories in the land of Israel. Like they are apportioned, but each lands when they get there. And apparently they each have to send a shaliach. What makes it weird, that now that you pointed out, is that Ephraim isn't named from the tribe of Joseph, namely Manasseh, but Ephraim doesn't get that same marker. I guess I'd have to go back and see which is which, but my guess would be, well, so here's the tricky thing too about how the Torah loves subverting lineages, is that either Ephraim is older, but Joseph switched his hands, so he gave, did I say that right? Either, whichever one was younger, he switched his hands so that Joseph gave him the right-handed blessing, which is supposed to be the top tier for the older sibling. Doesn't really matter because they both got portions of land, so it's not really like one was elevated, but there is a comment in there about how the younger will rule over the older and whatever, just like happened with Joseph and, sorry, not, yes, that happened with Joseph, but I mean Jacob. Jacob gave them blessings and he switched his hand, and Joseph tried to put his hands back, and Jacob's like, no, 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 I know what I'm doing. And he does that. So because of that confusion, I can't tell you now, is it from the tribe of Joseph, namely Manasseh, because Manasseh was the older, or from the tribe of Joseph, namely Manasseh, because Manasseh got the right hand blessing? But either way, one of those is probably why he gets that extra touch. And Ephraim does not. Joel, I'm not sure what, we do see that Ephraim is named, but the question is, why isn't he named as Joseph's? Like, why is Manasseh more of the tribe of Joseph?
I like your answer very much.
Okay.
We,
All right. Another question I always have, it's not so much in this parsha, but because of this parsha, then the question arises later, and especially in the book of Joshua, is like, what happened to Caleb? He and Joshua are presented on sort of equal footing in this parsha. They both spoke truth to power, or truth to the mob, and expressed their faith in God and their loyalty to Moses and everything. And Joshua, who we see already had, like I said, he pops in and out of like all over the Torah, or all over the last 4 books of the Torah, of how his relationship with Moses is singular and whatever. But based on this parsha, you would think Caleb would also be quite elevated. And then we like never really hear from him again. Like his name appears in the book of Joshua, but he's not like a main player the way you might think he could be, or whatever. So I always wonder just like what happened with him. I'm sure there's a midrash in there somewhere. He became a peacenik. Which tribe was he again?
It says Judah.
Judah. The lions. I don't know.
Okay, I didn't realize that Ephraim was the other son of Joseph. So that would explain why they say, namely the tribe of Manasseh, because Ephraim is already in there. So they're kind of explaining. So
Right.
Joshua was from Joseph's line also. So he did
Right.
much better than his cousin. I guess that would be a cousin.
Yeah. I guess there's that.
I better stand up.
What?
Oh, nothing. Sorry.
Okay. Yes, Joel.
That's kind of well explained when these 2 boys were born in Egypt. And the first one, of course, was Ephraim. And if you look at the Hebrew, it's the same root as the word peri, Borei peri hagofen. And it really means to make me fruitful. So, of course, when we drink wine, we're saying a blessing over the fruitfulness of the earth that gave forth the grapes,
Right.
wine. Manasseh, what that means is Joseph said that being in Egypt has made me forget. That's literally what it means. In Manasseh, it's also the same root word in Gid HaNasheh. That is the sciatic nerve. We'll recall that Jacob's sciatic nerve was injured, and it has to do with being with the forgetfulness. So Gid HaNasheh and Menasheh. I did want to point out one thing that's very beautiful. Of course, everyone here knows that this Parsha is about spying out the land, making a tour of the land. If I'm going to go to France, to Paris, I'm going to make a tour. It's the same word in Hebrew. And sure enough, verse 2, it says, Yaturu. So, okay, there's tour. And as we know, we have to change the inflection based upon who is talking and what the time frame is. So we say Vayaturu et Aretz Canaan. So these people are going to be selected to go for themselves to tour, to make a tour and to spy out. Okay, so I just want to point out that this is so beautiful because once you learn that word tour means to spy, and here I am reading towards the end at 15, 1539, which we were just talking about, and it says that you shall not go about after your own heart and after your own eyes. So people here are going to say, but wait a minute, what's it have to do with tour and spying out? And in the Hebrew, it says, velo taturu, acharei lavavachem ve'acharei heinechem. So here is that word taturu. And it says, you are not to search out after the thoughts of your own heart and the thoughts of your own eyes. So, of course, today that makes all the sense in the world to me. It's a beautiful little pun on the word tour. Now, I didn't know that my whole life. Maybe I would have considered things differently because sadly, like many others, I did search out after things of my own heart. And I did search out after things of my own eyes. And looking back today, I might say, wow, I wish I knew this years ago. Maybe I would have stopped searching out after things that are not so important.
My translation says lustful urges there. Do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. It doesn't mean, my translation doesn't imply you can't follow your heart in anything.
Well, that's why I prefer the Hebrew. And the Hebrew, it's clearly the same, what we call the shoresh. Shoresh means the root of the word, identical root, below taturu. And
No, but the zonim has a lustful connotation. So the second half of it still.
yes, Asher tem zonim acharehem.
Yeah.
That thou, a zona, by the way, is a prostitute. Clearly a prostitute. We use it in a wide sense. Doesn't have to be a woman hanging out on 42nd Street in New York. It can be.
They don't hang out on 42nd Street
Not
anymore.
anymore.
Not anymore.
I tell you.
Digging myself. So anyway, zonim.
That's 40 years ago.
Following other gods.
Right, that's true too. Yes.
And my translation's after which you used to go astray. And the English, that's why I'm using the most ancient English translation I can find. And mine has the Hebrew on the left and the English on the right. And I have two eyeballs and I can kind of keep track of both. So I know where to study. Anyway, that's it. Tour.
I think my life would have been a lot sadder and will be a lot sadder if I can't use my eyes and my heart to appreciate things and to lead me to good places, I hope. But
yes,
that's what my eyes and my heart are for.
we agree.
I think some things in Torah are stated so that people will do them and then realize later that, well, reflect on that choice later. It's like sometimes in order to get people to do things, you have to make them off limits. No, you can't do that.
Reverse
Right. So
psychology.
we're all basically children in the eyes of God.
And I think we acknowledge that we're all human. We have two sides of our brain. We have the logical side, which I just explained as far as the Hebrew, but we also have the other side of our brain, which does follow ideas and thoughts and things that are not always logical. And I think we need both. If we only had one side of the brain, we would therefore be computers. We would know everything, we would forget nothing, our behavior would be perfect, and that's not who we are.
This is also 37, 38, 39 is also traditionally part of the Ve'ahavta. It's not in our prayer book, but it is in some prayer books in that part. And then you'll see 40, 41, that is the end of our Ve'ahavta as well. Leman tiskru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'hitem kedoshim l'lechem. Ani Adonai Elohecha. So it's important, yeah, to not follow your heart and your eyes into your Yetzer Hara.
Although even that's necessary sometimes.
That's true too. Like one time in rabbinical school, I think I've mentioned this before, but I think it's funny. We watched the Star Trek episode where Shatner gets split into two people as a evidence of why we need our Yetzer Hara and our Yetzer Hatov to be together, because the fully good Shatner, I can't think of his character's name, Captain Kirk. The fully good one is like he can't make a decision. He's a terrible captain. But the bad one is a decisive captain. He makes good choices for security, but also he like runs around assaulting people. So like, it's not a great. You need the two to keep in balance. So yes. I wonder, did anyone have any questions or comments about this man collecting wood?
Yeah, he died, and I break the literal Sabbath a lot, although the reform idea of what I can do on Shabbat is a lot kinder and a lot, I think, more realistic and more true. But anyway, yeah, that to die just because nobody even asked why he was collecting wood. Did he have a sick child that he had to keep warm or something? So yeah.
And did it actually say he was Jewish? Maybe he wasn't even aware of the rules for the Sabbath day that I saw.
Well, yeah, so that's something that stuck out to me. So first of all, it doesn't actually matter if he is Jewish, because if he lives in the Israelite camp, he has to obey Israelite law. But it says the Israelites were in the wilderness and they came upon a man gathering wood, which sounds like, I don't know, like they just found someone in the wilderness doing that, as opposed to one day when the Israelites were in the wilderness, a man in the camp went about gathering wood, you know? So I don't know. Chizkuni says this teaches that Moses must have appointed men especially to look out for lawbreakers on the Sabbath. So there were men, or there were Israelites looking for this man. So when it says they came upon, it's not like they accidentally found a stranger in the woods, but like that they were looking. They caught him. Yimtzu means like they found him, which could mean like found as in a surprise, or it could mean like found him out, you know?
Mhm.
But I
It's one of those things that needs midrash to fill in the
it does.
details.
Yeah. Rashi says so then the next verse, they brought him before Moses, is or that those who found him as he was gathering wood brought him before Moses. This reiteration of him gathering wood is to say that they told him to stop and he continued to do so.
Oh.
And so they had to bring him in, that he would, but it's like, yeah, it's one of those things that needs midrash, it needs commentary, because on the face of it, we don't get a lot of detail. And I mean, we do know, we are told elsewhere that that breaking the Sabbath is a capital crime, but this is one of the only places that we really see such things in action.
Mhm.
And it's pretty alarming in how it's presented in the Torah itself, I think.
Mhm.
But
And in this case, it's not the people interpreting the rule said, well, we need to kill him. It
Right.
says the Lord said to
God, yeah.
It's sort of like an example of what goes before, but the person be he citizen or stranger in verse 30. Who defiantly reviles the Lord, he'll shall be cut off from the people. And then it goes on to give this example of
Right.
what happens, which doesn't happen all the time. So
Right.
can't always make connections.
And I suppose that that link, that chronology, does teach us that this is a person who resides in the camp, whether Israelite or stranger, and he knew the rules. He was warned, but he actively, defiantly reviles the law, which, by proxy means the Lord. And so this is the justification that this isn't like an accident. This isn't, all of the reasons that we might think of why somebody shouldn't be stoned to death for such a thing, that there's all this other context.
And right above it, it talks about if you do things unwittingly, you can make a sacrifice. But he was
Right.
like you. I didn't read it that way, but you're the way they emphasize gathering wood. It mentions at least twice, so it wasn't unwittingly, I guess is the point that it was making.
Yeah, I think so too. Which, as Reformed Jews, we still are in favor of loosening up Shabbat laws. But I think in its context, when read all together, it makes sense. Yes, Joel.
There's another important principle, and it's this. If you see the same phrase in the same verse repeated, or if you see it in the second verse repeated, it's a reminder for us to keep our ears open. And of course, 32 and 33, it says, Mekoshesh Eitzim, a man gathering sticks. So here it is, right in two verses. I think it's here to show us a principle. I don't literally accept this as being true because I believe that people are people. And I think a lot of us, we like to humble ourselves and say previous generations, oh, they were so froom, everybody did this. And I'm not so sure. I think people are people. And when I look back at the time this was written, they also had Asherah. They were worshiping other gods. They had Baal. They were worshiping gods of other nations. And so anyway, to me, people are people, but it's still important to notice when I see that the double use, I can know right away, let me open my ears, let me look for the metaphor. And the metaphor is we're one people. So no one here should think that we're second-class citizens of any sort, not at all.
I like that, Josh, and I appreciate the reminder that it doesn't have to be literal even in its own context. I mean, we might take the whole Torah to be metaphor, but there are parts that even for the storytellers that may have been passing down these oral stories and believed parts of them, that there were illustrations added in, examples, that were never meant to be taken literally. Any last questions or thoughts or feelings about Torah? David Gilbert, you haven't really said anything.
No, I've read both in Sepharia, and I felt kind of stupid that it never occurred to me, but I accidentally clicked on a passage, just one line, and all of a sudden this window opened up and I could see the commentaries, and boom, there's Rambam, and there's Rashi, and there's Ibn Ezra. And so I just kind of got immersed in reading prior to today. So I had a lot of the points that were brought up were in fact already there. I thought Joel's point about the fact that touring is to some extent always spying. And I thought, what an interesting way of looking at that. And it reminded me of a novel I read many years ago about a spy novel in which a priest is in fact able to get great amounts of information to the side that he is supporting while on a tour, and even takes pictures of installations that are strictly forbidden in China, but is able to go ahead and do that because he talks about, oh, what beautiful trees these are and flowers, and yet he manages to get what he needs in the background. And I thought, yeah, Joel, that's a pretty good insight. And the other thing is, in my translation of the Haftarah Joshua, Rahab is called a harlot. That it's no question that that's what she is. However, she refuses to reveal to the king their whereabouts, and in fact urges them to go on to safety, but requests, look out for me, when you take over. Show some kindness to the one who spared your lives. Thus you should spare mine. But yeah, I was also disturbed by the gathering of the wood, but I thought, again, in the context following, if it's an accidental thing, here's what you do. But if it's deliberate, and here's an example, I thought, oh, well, not a very pleasant example. But when you see that all of this followed the spies' reports directly, and that directly followed Miriam's being hit with leprosy for her transgression, kind of all fit in together as the consequences of not following what God has told you to do. And I really liked your explanation, which was one of about 7 that I ran across for why Moses sent people in, why God told them to send them there. Not, as it happens, God, I'm sure, knew what the spies would say, but literally to say, hey, what's the best way in, and which part do we go first? And it sounded, from my recollection, that Moses was giving very explicit directions on, here's how you go into the land. Now you go south first, and then you're going to head over to the west, and then you're going to go up the coast. I mean, he was quite specific about how he wanted things done and what specific information he was looking for. And I think Moses may have been surprised by the reports of the spies, God not at all. And I think your explanation made the most sense. It didn't make sense to me when I first read it. Come on, God, what are you doing, setting these guys up? But he knew what would happen, yes, but it was for Moses just the mark of a good military leader. We're not going to march on in without knowing the best way to do this.
Need reconnaissance.
Well, yes, God is on our side, but check your powder first.
Right.
God helps those who help themselves.
Yeah, be prepared. Yeah. And Joel sent something that I can't read yet. Hold on.
He wrote the about the definition of zona,
Oh,
which
okay.
is a whore. And that's certainly, yeah, that's, I mean, I think that's its plain text. I have also seen people, I think in an attempt to like recoup Rahav's image, to connect the word zona with its root hazon, or mazon, same root, that it means food, like, and as Joel put in the primitive root, highly fed and therefore wanton. So mazon has this connotation of, you know, of being well fed. So I've seen people make that connection and say, so she's an innkeeper, like she was, you know, she owned the tavern, but like also she lives in the wall around the city. Who lives in the wall around the city? People who live on the margins. I mean, literally and figuratively, right? So even if she ran a tavern and there was food, there was also for sure prostitution. So it doesn't really, like, I think it's more worthwhile for us to accept that as a part of her identity, as a means of destigmatizing sex work, as opposed to try to deny that part of her identity to destigmatize her. So, and it like just the literal like she clearly is a prostitute. I like, there's just no doubt of how the word is used. So anyway. All right. Well, we are over time. And it's been lovely. I will see you all next week.
Thank
Safe
you.
trip.
Bye.